Hey guys, I wish that we had more time to read the entire book, and we're going to just do our best, get through as much as we can, focusing on some of the major skills that we've chosen this book for. So we're going to read chapter 9, pages 99 to 102, and then I'm going to pause for you to answer some questions, or, yeah, two questions on the assignment for today. So chapter 9 begins if on page 99, like I said, if you're using your book. Otherwise, just look on your screen. And here we go. You can just take that back, boy. This order, given by me to Cecil Jacobs, was the beginning of a rather thin time for Jem and me. My fists were clenched, and I was ready to let fly. Atticus had promised me he would wear me out if he ever heard of me fighting any more. I was far too old and too big for such childish things, and the sooner I learned to hold it in, the better off everybody would be. I soon forgot. Cecil Jacobs made me forget. He had announced in the schoolyard the day before that Scout Finch's daddy defended ends. I denied it, but told Jem. "What do you mean by saying that?" I asked. "Nothing," Jem said. "Ask Atticus, he'll tell you." "Do you defend ends, Atticus?" I asked him that evening. "Of course I do. Don't say ends, Scout, that's common." "It's what everybody at school says." "From now on it'll be everybody unless one." "Well, if you don't want me to grow up talking that way, why do you send me to school?" My father looked at me mildly, amusement in his eyes. Despite our compromise, my campaign to avoid school had continued in one form or another since my first day's dose of it. In the beginning of last September had brought on sinking spells, dizziness, and mild gastric complaints. I went so far as to pay a nickel for the privilege of rubbing my head against the head of Miss Rachel's cook's son, who was afflicted with a tremendous ringworm. It didn't take. But I was worrying another bone. "Do all lawyers defend Negroes, Atticus?" "Of course they do, Scout." "Then why did Cecil say you defended ends? He made it sound like you were running a still." Atticus sighed. "I'm simply defending a Negro. His name's Tom Robinson. He lives in that little settlement beyond the town dump. He's a member of Calpurnia's church, and Cal knows his family well. She says they're clean living folks. Scout, you aren't old enough to understand some things yet, but there's been some high talk around town to the effect that I shouldn't do much about defending this man. It's a peculiar case. It won't come to trial until summer session. John Taylor was kind enough to give us a postponement." "If you shouldn't be defending him, then why are you doing it?" "For a number of reasons," said Atticus. "The main one is, if I didn't, I couldn't hold up my head in town. I couldn't represent this county in the legislature. Couldn't even tell you or Jem not to do something again." "You mean if you didn't defend that man, Jem and me wouldn't have to mind you any more?" "That's about right." "Why?" "Because I could never ask you to mind me again. Scout, simply by the nature of this work, every lawyer gets at least one case in his lifetime that affects him personally. This one's mine, I guess. You might hear some ugly talk about it at school, but do one thing for me if you will. You just hold your head high and keep those fists down. No matter what anybody says to you, don't you let 'em get your goat. Try fighting with your head for a change. It's a good one, even if it does resist learning." "Atticus, are we going to win it?" "No, honey." "Then what?" "Simply because we were licked 100 years before we started is no reason for us not to try to win," Atticus said. "You sound like Cousin Ike Finch," I said. Cousin Ike Finch was Macomb County's sole surviving Confederate veteran. He wore a General Hood-type beard, of which he was inordinately vain. At least once a year, Atticus, Jem, and I called on him, and I would have to kiss him. It was horrible. Jem and I would listen respectfully to Atticus and Cousin Ike rehash the war. "Tell you what, Atticus," Cousin Ike would say, "the Missouri Compromise was licked us, but if I had to go through it again, I'd walk every step of the way there and every step back just like I did before, and furthermore, we'd whip 'em this time. Now, in 1864, when Stonewall Jackson came around I beg your pardon, young folks, old Blue Light wasn't in heaven yet, God rest his saintly brow." "Come here, Scout," said Atticus. I crawled into his lap and tucked my head under his chin. He put his arms around me and rocked me gently. "It's different this time," he said. "This time we aren't fighting the Yankees. We're fighting our friends. But remember this, no matter how bitter things get, they're still our friends. And this is still our home." With this in mind, I faced Cecil Jacobs in the schoolyard next day. "You gonna take that back, boy?" "You gotta make me first," he yelled. "My folks says your daddy was a disgrace and that end ought to hang from the water tank." I drew a bead on him, remembered what Atticus had said, and dropped my fists and walked away. "Scout's a coward," ringing in my ears. It was the first time I ever walked away from a fight. Somehow, if I fought Cecil, I would let Atticus down. Atticus so rarely asked Jem and me to do something for him. I could take being called a coward for him. I felt extremely noble for having remembered, and remained noble for 3 weeks. Then Christmas came, and disaster struck. So I'm stopping here for just a moment. I want you to pause this, and please go to the assignment for Chapter 9 called Through a Child's Eyes. We've just learned the first of the case, and the case is going to be pretty much the rest of the book, but we're hearing it just from what Scout hears on the playground and what Atticus tells her, knowing that she's not going to really get it. So the first question that you're going to have is, what do we learn? If you have to rewind and listen to this again, you got to go back to your book, please do. But pause here, answer that question, and then I'm going to continue with the end of the book. Oh, wait. Okay, unpause. I'm now going to scroll and move in the novel to page 116. So we're missing a bunch of stuff that occurs. Scout's aunt and uncle, Aunt Alexandra and Uncle Jack, come for Christmas, and there's a lot of discussion of things that really aren't all that important. But what is important to know is that Scout and Francis get into a fight because Francis says that Atticus, just like Cecil Jacobs, says that Atticus is an N lover. He's the disgrace of the family for defending a black man, and Scout, fights him and punches him and says curse words and things like that. So there's a lot of funny things with curse words in here. But we're going to look at page 116, and let's see if I can find it in here. Again, it would be great for you to read this on your own. But we are, so as you can see up here, Francis looked at me carefully, and he's saying, "And lover." He's taunting, provoking Scout to fight him, and she does. And then Uncle Jack comes and spanks her. But then that night, Uncle Jack and Atticus have a conversation, and I am going to find that way right here. Here we go. We'll start here, and this is, like I said, page 116 if you're following along in the novel. This is Atticus speaking here to Uncle Jack. "Jack, when a child asks you something, answer him for goodness sake, but don't make a production of it. Children are children, but they can spot an evasion quicker than adults, and evasion simply muddles them." "No," my father mused, "you had the right answer this afternoon, but the wrong reasons. Bad language is a stage all children go through, and it dies with time when they learn they're not attracting attention with it. Hot-headedness isn't. Scout's got to learn to keep her head, and learn soon with what's in store for her these next few months. She's coming along, though. Jem's getting older, and she follows his example a good bit now. All she needs is assistance sometimes. Atticus, you've never laid a hand on her. I admit that. So far, I've been able to get by with threats. Jack, she minds me as well as she can. Doesn't come up to scratch half the time, but she tries." "That's not the answer," said Uncle Jack. "No, the answer is she knows I know she tries. That's what makes the difference. What bothers me is that she and Jem will have to absorb some ugly things pretty soon. I'm not worried about Jem keeping his head, but Scout would just as soon jump on someone as look at him if pride's at stake." I waited for Uncle Jack to break his promise. He still didn't. Atticus, how bad is this going to be? You haven't had too much chance to discuss it. It couldn't be worse, Jack. The only thing we've got is a black man's word against the Yules. The evidence boils down to you did, I didn't. The jury couldn't possibly expect it to take Tom Robinson's word against the Yules. Are you acquainted with the Yules? To pause here for a second, when Atticus says this, he's asking the reader too. Do you know about the Yules? Think back about Burris Yule, who came to school with lice in his hair, and what we find out about that family, and all the ways that they break the rules of the town. So it's the black man's word versus the Yules. Keep that in mind. Uncle Jack said, yes, he remembered them. He described them to Atticus, but Atticus said, you're a generation off. The present ones are the same, though. What are you going to do then? Before I'm through, I intend to jar the jury a bit. I think we'll have a reasonable chance on appeal, though. I really can't tell at this stage, Jack. You know, I'd hoped to get through life without a case of this kind. But John Taylor, that's the judge, pointed at me and said, you're it. Let this cup pass from you, eh? Right. But do you think I could face my children otherwise? You know what's going to happen as well as I do, Jack, and I hope and pray I can get Jem and Scout through it without bitterness, and most of all without catching Macon's usual disease. Why reasonable people go stark raving mad when anything involving a Negro comes up is something I don't pretend to understand. I just hope that Jem and Scout come to me for their answers instead of listening to the town. I hope they trust me enough. Jean Louise. My Scout jumped. I stuck my head around the corner. Sir? Go to bed. I scurried to my room and went to bed. Uncle Jack was a prince of a fellow not to let me down, but I never figured out how Atticus knew I was listening, and it was not until many years later that I realized he wanted me to hear every word he said. So at this point, please go back to the document called Chapter 9 Through a Child's Eyes, and we've learned a little bit more about the case now based on the conversation between Atticus and Uncle Jack, and I'd like you to jot down some notes about that as well. And then the final part of that worksheet asks you to think about, what do we still not know that's like pretty important about this case? What questions do you have that you assume will be answered later? And then you should submit that to the assignment to get credit. Thank you so much. Miss you guys.